Hi everybody and welcome to this evening's Matrix Live, coming to you Midnight Edition, episode 18th. And I'm afraid it's just me this evening because myself and Amandine and Erik have been out in Cambridge all day going and recruiting folks, hopefully in the assumption that we'll have enough money to expand the team in the coming months. And so I'm back home here, pretty dead, pretty late, but thought I'll go and try to record an episode anyway to let everybody know what's been going on. So starting off with funding, we're hitting a new massive high on Patreon this week, thanks to a last-minute big donation of $250 a month from Joanne Box. Thank you very, very much indeed. This takes us up to $4,500 a month, which is tantalizingly, even more than tantalizingly, close to our £5,000 a month target. So thank you enormously for this, especially whilst we're struggling to get the long-term funding in place and we've basically run off the end of our current runway. This is really, really, really appreciated. And we're basically in a situation now where I'm reaching into my savings to help support the whole project. And obviously we're hoping that we're going to have large long-term funding coming in too. So basically any donations like this make an enormous difference. Thank you. Meanwhile, progress on long-term funding itself is hopefully inexorably marching forwards. And the other update on kind of organisation and funding stuff is that new Vector SARL in France exists. So we have a company now in which to hire the French team, assuming that we have money with which to pay their salaries, which is a huge, huge deal. Up to now it's been us in the UK who have got a sort of home to keep working on Matrix in the longer term, whereas as you probably know, all of the mobile development on iOS and Android happens in Rennes in Brittany, where Yannick and Manu and Guillaume at the moment are desperately working away, keeping the project alive. So having the ability to keep them working on Matrix, hopefully in the long term, is really, really good news for us. Now, this week has been obviously huge for releases. We've been promising them for ages. We have this kind of bad habit that they tend to stack up a bit and all land at the same time. And meanwhile, new stuff is already queued up, ready to go. And we constantly try to do better at this, but in this instance, everything became unstuck at the same time on Wednesday this week, where we had new Riot Web, new Riot iOS, Android, Synapse, and Spec all happening at the same time. So quickly, Riot Web 0.13 came out, also on desktop. Obviously, this introduces groups or communities, which everybody's been looking forward to for a long time. It's not the final implementation, honestly. The API and the underlying infrastructure is looking pretty good, but the UI still has a lot of stuff that we still want to do. So the stuff which is there is obviously Flair, the ability to create these groups, the ability to view the ones which you're currently in and manage the groups. What we don't have yet is the ability to organize the left-hand panel of your rooms in Riot Web in order to actually view sets of rooms a bit like you can on Slack or Discord. And this is hopefully coming in the next version, and we're starting work on it next week. But just a heads up that we know that we've kind of got the basics in place, but there's still a lot more that we can do there. Also lots of bug fixes and landed in Riot 13 as well. But meanwhile, Riot 14 is already really taking shape. There were lots of things which we held off merging to develop until 13 was out the door. And in the last, since Wednesday, we've landed some huge, huge amounts of work that have been very kindly contributed by Travis. And Travis has implemented granular settings, which allows you to customize any property, really, which you can get at in settings on a different sort of resolution. It could be per device, it could be per room, per account. It does make sense for all the settings, but critically the infrastructure is there to make that happen. So that landed on Thursday. And then custom presence is another big contribution from Travis. This lets the little the avatar next to the message composer act as a custom presence setter so that you can say that you're online, away, or offline, or whatever. This is hidden behind a feature flag at the moment, and but was merged again on Thursday, and also pinned messages, and this one was actually merged prior to the cut of 0.13, but again is hidden behind a feature flag because there are a couple of bugs and a couple of visual things which need to be fixed on it, but this allows you to go and pin arbitrary messages into your rooms. So huge thanks to Travis for working on this and contributing so much to this really cool stuff, which I guess in an ideal world perhaps the core team would get round to doing, but in practice this is the only way which is going to get done in the next year, so thank you so much, Travis. Other stuff on the horizon is the group stuff in Riot 14 or 0.14, which is grouping the left panel together. Luke is working away on that in the near future. We've also got end-to-end work at last coming through, so Dave has been making really good progress on improving the UI for managing end-to-end devices, and helping next up on that is going to be improving key share, also fixing the horrible bug where if you run Riot and multiple tabs at the same time, it corrupts its end-to-end store. So it's really exciting that we're finally making progress on end-to-end again. And last but not least, we've also merged my theming work for the status theme into Riot Web, which is looking pretty cool. That also involves the total rewrite of the room tinting logic, for anybody who cares about the room color customization. I think that's probably it for Riot Web. I'm sure there was something I'm missing. Not sure when we're going to cut the release, but basically there's a lot of stabilization work to be done on desktop. Oh, there's also been internationalization work happening from Stefan, basically improving the infrastructure a lot for our internationalization, which is very much appreciated as well. God, what was it going to be? Something else here, which I'm totally blanking on. This is why I need Amandine. I'm sorry. Anyway, Riot iOS, also a huge new release, landing all of our GSOC contributions from Dennis and Aram. Specifically, this is CallKit, PushKit, and share extensions, which makes the app feel completely different, honestly, in terms of being able to share stuff into it, as well as receive end-to-end encrypted notifications, which actually view correctly on the phone, as well as receive inbound phone calls like their native phone calls. It's really night and day and super exciting to have them. Also Siri support for placing calls by Siri, although we have an amusing problem there. The guys in France who've been testing it have had the problem that if the phone is localized into French and you say Riot, call somebody, or hey Riot, send a message on Riot please Siri, or whatever it is, the word riot does not work in French at all, so it gets transliterated, or it gets transcribed by Siri into R-A-Y-O-T-T-E, which is the closest thing in French that looks and sounds a bit like riot. If, however, you pronounce it Rio, which is probably vaguely how you might pronounce it, that also breaks because you end up with Rio there, because riot isn't a word in French. Basically, they've had amusing problems testing it, but it seems to be working pretty well. Finally, on mobile, on Riot Android, we had 0.7.4 out, which is a total rework of the VoIP code base, and critically, it also shares it adds end-to-end key sharing. So this is already revolutionizing things because it's also landed post the release on iOS. And trust me, the first time that you log into a new browser window in Riot and your phone suddenly pops up saying, oh, you've logged into a new machine. Do you want to share your end-to-end keys with that machine? And you click yes, and then suddenly all of your crypto history pops into place on the new browser session. It changes everything. Suddenly the end-to-end stuff is feeling infinitely more usable. And so it's really exciting that we have that on Android today and also on iOS in the next release coming up soon. Meanwhile, on mobile, the big next thing on the horizon is implementing communities or groups, because whilst we have it on Riot Web, it hasn't landed yet on mobile at all. And as we all know, features which work on desktop and web but don't exist on mobile end up being immediately kind of less useful than they should be. So that is on the near horizon too. Finally, on the back-end side of things, Synapse, we had 0.25 released on Wednesday, along with everything else. This was primarily to support custom room visibility inside communities and groups, so that if you add a room to a group, you don't automatically broadcast it to the world, but you can say, hey, I only want this room to be visible to people who are members of the group. That required some API changes, hence the new version of Synapse. Meanwhile, Synapse 0.25.1 was released today, which fixes an embarrassing LDAP authentication bug, or a bug with the auth modules API in general. And then 0.25.2 is out hopefully next week, probably on Monday, which will be providing flair for application services. Because a lot of work actually that's gone into the communities and group stuff has been trying to provide some good examples of how to use it. And on, I guess in the release on Wednesday or Thursday, we have finally sorted out the Patreon supporter groups. So lots of people should have got Patreon supporter group invites, or LiberiPay for that matter, last night, I think, where we created the new groups and invited everybody into them. So there should now be flair and groups provision for that. And meanwhile, Luke has been working away with Travis getting application services to announce group membership, so that anybody with a given prefix on a server automatically gets added to a given group. And that is the stuff that should be landing and coming early next week, and will be super fun, because finally IRC bridges and Slack and Gitter and everybody else will have the right little logos next to their name in order to say where they're coming from, rather than the ugly text display name modifications that we see today. Finally, on Dendrite, momentum is increasing, which is very, very good news. Rich has been working a lot on Dendrite, getting stuck into federation key management. Erik has been doing general maintenance, but also chasing Naffka bugs, Naffka being the in-memory NAF version of Kafka that we use for message passing if you have a monolithic Dendrite where everything sits in the same process. Hard to tell what the timings are going to be on that, but the thing that everybody is working for is to federate Matrix HQ at last into Dendrite. And for various reasons, we lost some momentum on Dendrite over the last few months, but hopefully we're picking up speed again. And a huge part of that is actually the community, who are getting more and more involved in pushing the whole project along, which again is so appreciated it's untrue. It means that Rich and Erik can get stuck in the really nightmarish architectural bits of it, and meanwhile the low-hanging fruit are up there for everybody to share. And it's really, really good to see open source working like it should. We've had PRs from Tech Guide doing turn server config, from PT Man doing device names, Anoa Dragon doing reCAPTCHA support, and a couple of other things I've forgotten, sorry. And Ross Shulman has been working away on the room alias endpoint over federation. So basically it's happening, and it will be really, really exciting to see Matrix HQ hopefully federating into it once Rich has sorted out the key management federation bugs that have been plaguing things there. Finally, last but not least, we've also released version 0.3 of the Matrix client server API, which is our first spec release in over 16 months. This is on one level very embarrassing, because it would be great if we kept releasing it a lot more frequently, but in practice, in some ways, it's only a ideological, or it's more of a conceptual rather than practical thing, in that everything has been documented that we've managed to document so far on the master branch. The only deal here is that we hadn't formally released it. So basically all of these endpoints were being documented and implemented as /unstable, whereas now they actually have a formal version that commits to them being stable at that version forevermore. And that makes it a lot easier for client and server implementers to know that the API isn't going to randomly change from under them, because if they use the right prefix, they're guaranteed to that version for the foreseeable. So in some ways it's only hygiene, but then it's also very important hygiene, and hopefully it will make life a bit easier now that that's released, and we'll commit to trying to release them on a regular basis going forwards. There's also been a lot more contributions coming in from the community to help plug some of the gaps on the spec for APIs which we have drafts for, or haven't even got drafts for, but we need to actually implement properly. There's been some contention over the right governance and workflow for doing that, but hopefully we've converged on something that works for everybody now, where basically everybody is welcome to go and PR an update to the spec for whatever functionality is missing, and we promise to review it and feedback on it as rapidly and constructively and efficiently as we can, and then merge it into the spec. And really, the more the merrier on that. Meanwhile, if you're proposing new functionality, probably a good bet is to draft it in Google Docs, where you get nice threaded comments and suggestions, track changes, revisions, all that sort of thing. Works a lot better than GitHub PR review for going and iterating rapidly with lots of people commenting on a proposal. Then you implement it to make sure it works. Then you PR it against the spec, and obviously we'll try to merge PRs into the spec and release them as rapidly as we can. In terms of what's new in the spec for 0.3, it's basically every API we got around to documenting in the last 16 months, and it's certainly not all of them, and some of them are deliberately not documented yet, like groups, because they keep evolving from under us. But you can read the changelog if you haven't already. It's all sorts of weird and wonderful bits and bobs and errors and bugs which are now formally released. So better late than never, and on one level it's been a slightly stressful time getting through some of the issues we've had on the spec in the last week, but on the plus side, it's kind of unblocked the whole process and reminded us of how important it is to keep releasing the spec. So hopefully it all works out for everybody in the end. I think that's about it, really. Sorry for being a bit worse for wear after having spent the day trying to recruit people into the wonderful world of Matrix. And yeah, thanks for listening. Have a good weekend, and hopefully speak to you soon. Bye.